May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders. The SS, Hitler's elite paramilitary force responsible for the Holocaust, is declared a criminal organization. Over 1 million men had served in the SS. The Allied directive was clear: arrest them all, bar them from ever holding authority again. 5 years later, former SS officers were back in police uniforms, government offices, and corporate boardrooms. By 1957, the West German Justice Ministry had a higher proportion of Nazi Party members than during the Third Reich itself. How did the men who ran the concentration camps end up running post-war Germany? To understand how this happened, you need to know what the SS was. The Schutzstaffel, the SS, started as Hitler's personal bodyguard unit. By the end of the war, it had become the most powerful organization in Nazi Germany. The SS ran the concentration camps. The SS carried out mass executions on the Eastern Front. The SS administered the final solution. At the Nuremberg Trials, the International Military Tribunal declared the SS a criminal organization. This was unprecedented. It meant that membership alone, regardless of individual actions, was evidence of participation in war crimes. The Allied policy was explicit. Over 400,000 former Nazis were detained in internment camps between 1945 and 1950. Former SS members would be permanently barred from positions of authority. No teaching, no policing, no government work. The goal was simple: these men would never hold power again. For about 2 years, the system held. SS members were arrested by the thousands. They faced tribunals. They were imprisoned or assigned to rubble-clearing duty in bombed-out cities. The German public supported this. The SS had been the face of Nazi brutality. No one wanted them back. But by 1947, the Allies faced a massive problem. If you appreciate history that answers the uncomfortable questions, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. Drop a comment telling me if you'd heard this story before. By 1947, Germany was in ruins. Cities were destroyed. The economy had collapsed. Millions were homeless and starving. To rebuild, Germany desperately needed skilled workers. Administrators to run government offices, engineers to rebuild infrastructure, police to maintain order, teachers to reopen schools, managers to restart factories. Here's the problem: a huge percentage of Germany's professional class had been members of the Nazi Party or its affiliated organizations, including the SS. Why? Because during the Nazi era, joining the party was often a career requirement. If you wanted to advance in business, government, or academia, party membership opened doors. It was networking. It was ambition. This didn't mean every party member was a camp guard or a war criminal. Many were desk workers, bureaucrats, technicians, people who joined for professional reasons, not ideological fanaticism. But under Allied policy, none of them could work in their fields. An engineer who designed bridges couldn't design bridges. A civil servant who'd processed paperwork couldn't process paperwork. A police detective couldn't investigate crimes. The result? Germany's economy couldn't restart. Government offices sat empty. Infrastructure projects stalled. And then the Cold War began. By 1948, the Soviet Union was blockading Berlin. The Western Allies realized they needed West Germany stable, functional, and anti-communist. A paralyzed, economically devastated Germany would be vulnerable to Soviet influence. The strategic calculation changed overnight. Punishing Nazis was less important than containing communism. So the Allies made a choice: pragmatism over justice. What happened next wasn't just a policy shift. It was a systematic legal reversal that would bring hundreds of thousands of former Nazis back into power. And it happened through a single law that few people today have ever heard of. In 1951, West Germany passed a law that changed everything. Article 131 of the Basic Law. It officially ended denazification, and it was part of a series of amnesty laws that, by some estimates, pardoned nearly 800,000 people. One analysis of these amnesties suggests the pardoned included thousands of SS and SA functionaries who had dragged victims to concentration camps, and even 20,000 people who had been sentenced for acts the Nazis themselves termed deeds against life, a bureaucratic euphemism for murder. This wasn't a quiet bureaucratic process. This was an official law explicitly pardoning mass murderers. Chancellor Konrad Adenauer justified it by claiming the main culprits have been prosecuted and switching policy from justice to Wiedergutmachung, making good through reparations instead of punishment. In a speech to the Bundestag in September 1951, Adenauer declared that the predominant majority of German people abhorred the crimes and had not participated in them. But thousands of culprits remained unpunished. The law had another provision. Officials who'd been dismissed for Nazi activities could retake jobs in the civil service. To ensure their reintegration, measures were put in place that effectively guaranteed their return. They became known as 131ers, named after the law that brought them back. West Germany needed civil servants to run the new government. The only people with administrative experience were those who'd run the Nazi government. By 1957, 77% of senior officials in the West German Justice Ministry were former Nazi Party members. That's a higher proportion than during the Third Reich itself. Between 1949 and 1973, Hans Globke. During the Nazi era, he'd co-authored the official legal commentary on the Nuremberg race laws, the legislation that stripped Jews of citizenship. After the war, he became chief of the Federal Chancellery, the most powerful, non-elected position in West Germany. He served from 1953 to 1963, essentially running the day-to-day operations of the government. Here's what makes Globke's case even more disturbing. In 1957, a researcher discovered that Globke had participated in meetings after the Wannsee Conference, where the final solution was being implemented. His name was in ministry files. Globke claimed he'd tried to soften anti-Jewish measures. East Germany repeatedly demanded his prosecution. West Germany refused. Former Nazi bureaucrats running the Justice Ministry was shocking enough. But what happened in German corporations was just as bad. And the way they escaped accountability reveals how the legal system itself was designed to protect them. German corporations needed experienced managers. Many executives had been Nazi Party members or SS officers during the war. IG Farben, the chemical conglomerate, provides the clearest example. IG Farben owned 42.5% of Degesch, the company that manufactured Zyklon B, the gas used in the death camps. IG Farben also operated a factory at Auschwitz using slave labor. After release, several returned to leadership positions at IG Farben's successor companies, BASF, Bayer, Hoechst. Fritz Termeer, sentenced to 7 years for enslavement, became chairman of the supervisory board of Bayer in 1956. Karl Wörster, who was acquitted, became chairman of the board of BASF in 1952. Heinrich Bütefisch, sentenced to 6 years for enslavement, went on to serve on supervisory boards of major German chemical companies. The men who'd used slave labor at Auschwitz were back running Germany's chemical industry within a decade. But what happened in corporate boardrooms was nothing compared to what happened in intelligence. Because in the world of espionage, the Americans didn't just tolerate former Nazis, they actively recruited them. And one organization would become the most disturbing example of how far this went. Reinhard Gehlen was a Wehrmacht general who'd run military intelligence on the Eastern Front during the war. His organization had worked closely with the SS. When Germany surrendered, Gehlen made a calculated offer to the Americans. He had files on Soviet military capabilities. He had agents still operating in Eastern Europe, He'd hand everything over in exchange for protection. The Americans accepted. In 1946, Galen was flown to Washington, debriefed by American intelligence, and sent back to Germany to rebuild his network under CIA control. When Galen recruited agents, he brought back his old colleagues, over 100 former SS and Gestapo officers. On December 11, 1953, Galen officially informed a Bundestag committee that around 40 of his employees came from the SS or SD, the SS intelligence service. He was lying. The actual number was over 100, possibly much higher. In 1956, this became the BND, West Germany's Federal Intelligence Service. The BND provided 70% of US intelligence on the USSR and Eastern Europe during the Cold War. Think about what that means. West Germany's intelligence service, funded by the Americans, was run by former Nazis spying on communists. One of Galen's employees was Alois Brunner, Adolf Eichmann's deputy. Brunner had sent over 100,000 Jews to ghettos and concentration camps. He was one of the most prolific killers in the Holocaust. After the war, Brunner worked with the Galen organization. In 1954, he fled West Germany before he could be prosecuted. Brunner ended up in Syria, where he worked for Syrian intelligence. Israel's Mossad tried to assassinate him twice in Damascus. Both attempts failed. Brunner lived until at least 1996, dying of old age, never prosecuted. Here's the most shocking part. In 1960, when Hans Globke was threatened during the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem, Galen proposed that Alois Brunner testify in Globke's defense. Let me repeat that. The head of West German intelligence proposed that a Holocaust mass murderer testify to defend a high-ranking government official. Brunner refused because he knew appearing in Germany meant certain arrest. In 1994, the BND destroyed Brunner's entire file, presumably to hide this scheme. Here's one more connection that shows how deep this went. Karl Silberbauer was the Gestapo officer who captured Anne Frank and her family in Amsterdam in 1944. After the war, Silberbauer was employed by the Galen organization. When it became the BND in 1956, he transferred with it. The man who captured the most famous Holocaust victim worked for post-war German intelligence. While former Nazis rebuilt their careers, there were people watching, survivors who'd lost everything, people who'd testified at trials and been promised justice. What they saw would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Now imagine you're a Holocaust survivor. You survived Auschwitz. You lost your family in the gas chambers. Allied soldiers liberated you. They promised justice. You testified at trials. You identified perpetrators. Then you watch as the camp guard who beat you joins the West German police. The bureaucrat who processed deportation orders returns to the civil service. The corporate manager who used you as slave labor goes back to the boardroom. And not only are they not punished, they're officially pardoned under Article 131. That was the reality for millions of survivors. They watched as the men who'd destroyed their lives resumed comfortable, respectable positions. Some survivors tried to speak out. They wrote letters. They contacted authorities. They provided evidence. But by the early 1950s, the political will for prosecutions had evaporated. The focus was on rebuilding and containing communism. The past was supposed to be forgotten. It wasn't until the 1960s that serious efforts to prosecute Nazi war criminals resumed, driven largely by younger Germans who demanded answers about what their parents had done. By then, most perpetrators had died of old age, destroyed evidence, or fled to South America. The message was clear. If you wait long enough, if you're useful enough, if the political winds shift in your direction, even participation in genocide can be forgiven. So did former SS soldiers get jobs after World War II? Yes, they absolutely did. Initially, the Allies tried to exclude them entirely. Over 400,000 were detained. SS membership was supposed to be permanently disqualifying, but within 6 years, that policy had completely collapsed. In 1951, West Germany passed Article 131, officially ending denazification and pardoning nearly 800,000 people through a series of amnesty laws. By 1957, the Justice Ministry had more Nazi Party members than during the Third Reich itself. The BND intelligence service was run by over 100 former SS and Gestapo officers. They lied to Parliament about it. Corporate executives convicted of using slave labor returned to boardrooms within a decade. Anne Frank's captor worked for German intelligence. One of the Holocaust's worst killers lived comfortably in Syria. Were they all equally guilty? No. Some were low-level bureaucrats who never harmed anyone directly, but many had been active participants in atrocities, and the system made no real effort to distinguish between them. The lesson here isn't about individual Germans. The lesson is about what happens when justice conflicts with strategic interests, when rebuilding is more important than accountability, when stability is more important than punishment, when the Cold War enemy is more frightening than the Nazi past. Justice loses. The Allies defeated Nazi Germany on the battlefield, but they didn't dismantle the structures of Nazi power. Many of the same people who ran the Third Reich went on to run the Federal Republic. The survivors who'd lost everything watched as their tormentors went unpunished, officially pardoned, and returned to power. And that wound has never fully healed. Former SS soldiers were supposed to be permanently excluded from German society. The Nuremberg Trials declared them members of a criminal organization. But within 6 years, they were back. In government, in police forces, in corporate boardrooms, in universities, even in intelligence services. Not because they deserved a second chance, but because Cold War pragmatism overrode justice for Holocaust survivors. The question, did former SS soldiers get jobs after the war, has a simple answer. Yes. Nearly 800,000 were officially pardoned. 77% of the Justice Ministry were former Nazis. The BND was run by over 100 former SS officers who lied to Parliament about their numbers. The more disturbing question is, why did we let them?